The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The Bank of Israel to sell up to $30 billion worth of reserves to help support the shekel. Labour vows to get Britain building again if it wins the next election. Plus, Metro Bank secures a new financing deal, but at the expense of some bondholders and shareholders. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. The Bank of Israel said today it will sell up to $30 billion worth of reserves in a move aimed at supporting its currency. The announcement came after the shekel fell by more than 2.5% against the US dollar to hit its lowest level for 7 years. Israel's main stock index, the TA35, rallied by 1% on the news, having plunged by nearly 6.5% on Sunday in its biggest one-day fall for 3 years. Well, joining me now is Professor Michael Ben-Gad, Professor of Economics at City University of London. Michael, very good to see you this afternoon. You've been in close contact with colleagues in Israel. What are you hearing from them just now?
If you watch the news channels in Israel right now, we're starting to get survivors and their perspective on what happened to them. And I can tell you, I've never heard so much rage. And the rage is directed at the government. I should make it very clear that there are a lot of people who will say that this is not the time to criticize the leadership, and that we should really focus on the things that Hamas has done. My answer is that none of us have any illusions about the barbarism of the people in Hamas. It's the job of the government, and in this case, the extremist ministers, many of who are serving in the government, who talk endlessly about security and endlessly about strength, and who haven't been able to keep the Morlocks away from us. Right? This is a complete catastrophe, and the economic impact is unfortunately now a footnote to all the tragedy that we're seeing. There'll be days and days of funerals going forward, and there'll be a lot more people dying in the days to come.
I mean, Mr. Netanyahu has said this war is going to reshape the Middle East. From what you're saying, it sounds like it might reshape Israeli politics.
I think that it is very likely that he is on his way out. There is, the only answer to how we got to this point is one word, and that's arrogance. And if you want to talk about, this is also reflected in the economic policy that we've seen over the last 9 months. There have been lots of efforts to change the governmental structure, to change the role of the courts, to strengthen the government at the expense of the judicial system and remove lots of checks and balances. That has had a very deleterious effect. I mean, Israel was the 21st century's big economic success story. And in 9 months, we've lost an enormous amount of foreign direct investment. We see more and more of the high-tech sector there. We still have lots of companies being formed. Israel has a high-tech sector that's second only to the one in Silicon Valley. But increasingly, they're choosing to incorporate in the United States because of the unpredictability of economic policy.
That's an interesting point you make there. And of course, Israel has actually been downgraded by a couple of the ratings agencies because of the instability caused by these rows over the judicial reforms.
They've not actually been downgraded yet, but there have been warnings that is coming if things carry on as they are. It's important to keep. I mean, we have a Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, who knows very little about economics. He has all sorts of very strange ideas about how you run the economy on the basis of all sorts of obscure things he's taken out of the Talmud or God knows where. He's also a minister in the defense. He's also put himself in the defense ministry in some sort of official capacity, even though he knows even less about the military. I mean, he's a draft dodger himself. And as I said, this cannot carry on. The shekel has already lost 12%. I mean, we're talking about the last 2 days, but it lost 12% of its value over the course of this year. Now, some of that is attributable to the strengthening of the dollar, but it's dropped more in Israel than in other places. Last year, Israel's government budget was in surplus. This year it was expected, according to them, to be in 2% deficit because of a lot of the policies that reward people who don't necessarily participate in the economy at the expense of the productive sectors. That doesn't take into account all the dynamic scoring that should be implemented, but the finance minister has gotten rid of a lot of the economic expertise. A lot of the ministers are at war with the central bank governor, who, full disclosure, he's a close personal friend of mine. But he's a serious person. He is respected around the world. He's one of the top finance experts in the world, a person who gave up an endowed chair at Wharton in order to come back and try to help the economy along. And right now he is selling off dollars in order to support the shekel. He's going to probably have to raise interest rates, and undoubtedly, as before, there's going to be a lot of criticism, right?
Michael, there's so much more I wanted to ask you, but we're out of time, I'm afraid. Do come back and see us again. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Some other business news stories for you now. And shares of Metro Bank rose by as much as 23% today after the lender secured a financing deal in which it raised £325 million worth of capital. It will raise £150 million from a sale of new shares, £102 million of which will come from Jaime Gilinski, the Colombian billionaire who becomes Metro's biggest shareholder with a 53% stake. A further £175 million will be raised in debt, while Metro Bank has also refinanced some £600 million worth of existing debt, although some existing bondholders will take a financial hit as a result. The fund manager Odey Asset Management is reportedly to close its wealth management division and return money to clients. The Financial Times is reporting that the wealth business is closing in both Guernsey and the UK and that the Financial Conduct Authority has been made aware. Well, the news comes, of course, after Crispin Odey, the founder, was accused of sexual misconduct. He's since left the business. And this year's Nobel Prize for Economics has been won by Claudia Goldin, a professor at Harvard University, for her work in exposing gender gaps, including those in pay. Professor Goldin is just the third woman to win the prize, which is worth 11 million Swedish crowns, or around £820,000, and she's the first to win it by herself, rather than sharing it. Among her achievements was to prove that the gap in pay occurs with the birth of a first child, with women typically devoting more time to childcare rather than differences in educational attainment. Now, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has told the Labour Party conference in Liverpool that the party will examine every ongoing major infrastructure project to get Britain building again on day one if it wins the next general election. She also said that Labour would commission an independent inquiry to look at what had gone wrong with HS2. Well, joining me now from the conference in Liverpool is Paul Dreschler. He's chair of the International Chamber of Commerce and, of course, former president of the CBI. Paul, great to see you this afternoon. The big news, I guess, was that Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, endorsed Rachel Reeves at the end of the speech. Big news?
Well, Ian, good afternoon and a pleasure to be with you. And not only did Mark Carney, but I think everybody in the room was on their feet throughout what I think was one of the best speeches given at any party conference in the past number of years. A Shadow Chancellor, very clear, very confident, passionate about the role of business and the impact on the economy, and very convincing about her understanding of what it would take to really get momentum into economic growth in the event they're elected. I mean, she was on fire, she was enthusiastic, confident, I thought very determined, and very, very clear about the steps that need to be taken to move the country forward. I'd also say, Ian, she was also very straight about the diagnosis of the current state of the nation in terms of our financial challenges, the challenges to restore public services to levels that people were used to. All in all, I think she covered all the bases. Enthusiastic about science, technology, really good on getting the UK building again. I mean, it was full of promise, I think.
Do you worry, though, Paul, that, if Labour do in the next election, fiscally speaking, they are not going to have a lot of room for manoeuvre?
Well, I think the good news is you have a Shadow Chancellor who started her speech by acknowledging the fact that the finance of the UK are seriously strained. I think they're in no doubt. And that's why they're really doubling down on a call to businesses, not only in the UK, but internationally, to engage with them and to invest in this country and create jobs. And I think both herself and Jonathan Reynolds, and indeed even David Lammy this morning, talking in his capacity as Shadow Foreign Secretary, was very clear that the best way for the UK to recover moving forward is through business investment and business growth. And I think they were all very convincing and all aligned on the role and value business can make. Should be encouraging to all businesses and hopefully also to those who are international, who see that there's a government in waiting, who are very clear about the value that business can bring, the role of business, and that we'll have much greater clarity through the steps they're taking to have consistency on policy, so it isn't being changed every other week. Because business will love consistency, it will love clarity, and will love a government that's actually committed to growing the economy.
The biggest share that she got during the speech was nothing to do with business, though. It was about the imposition of VAT on school fees. I mean, it's a policy that has a lot of inconsistency. Do you think it will make it to the manifesto?
Well, look, I think the reality is they're talking to a very broad-based audience, many of whom are really struggling to make a living at the moment. And so I sort of recognise there's a lot of different things Keir Starmer and the team are going to have to do to get everybody out to vote for them. They've got to appeal to investors. They've got to appeal to people who can't afford to eat. We have 14 million people in the UK at the moment living in poverty. And the only way to change that is through business investment, business growth, pump the economy, create the tax receipts that can enable the public services to be restored to the levels that people need, and the wealth creation that can bring more people into the full economy out of poverty.
All right, Paul, we've got to leave it there. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you.
Pleasure, Ian. Take care.
Still to come here on Business Live, we'll have a look at how the markets are doing this Monday afternoon. Don't go away.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent. From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Fly Emirates. Fly better. Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. The recent earthquake in Morocco and flooding in Pakistan highlighted the generosity of people in supporting humanitarian causes. Well, helping both was the global fundraising platforms like GoFundMe, which has just reached the milestone of £1 billion worth of UK donations to crowdfunders since it launched in the market 5 years ago. Joining me now, very pleased to say, is Tim Cadigan, Chief Executive of GoFundMe. Tim, welcome to you. How big is the UK in terms of your global donation volumes?
It's a meaningful part. We operate in 19 countries, and the UK is one of our bigger international markets. And as you pointed out, we just hit £1 billion donated by 23 million people in Britain. So a very significant milestone and an important market for us.
I think I'm right in saying, though, that in terms of donations per head of population, Ireland is the most generous country.
It is currently the leading country, 4 years in a row. So we'll have our annual report out in January, and we'll see, hopefully the UK can catch up.
So which causes have attracted the most donations this year?
You know, one of the things that's very interesting this year is cost of living related fundraisers have grown very quickly. In fact, over the last 2 years, they're up about 10x, and about 3 million people have donated to fundraisers with an element of cost of living in.
That's very interesting. I mean, I notice in the US in particular, increasing numbers of people are using the platform to fund for their medical care.
Yeah, medical expenses and related expenses have been a major category pretty much since we started. And that continues to be the case, just because they're such a big part of the costs for people. It's a big life event often.
What about Ukraine? Obviously, I imagine that attracted a lot of interest last year. Has that been maintained this year?
It was very significant. So about $750 million through GoFundMe overall was generated. It is less. In fact, we're talking with some of the groups that were fundraising to try and reinvigorate interest, because obviously there's still a lot of need.
And which countries were the most supportive of Ukraine?
Well, the US was the biggest, but actually the European markets were very big, and the UK has done an amazing job of supporting Ukraine.
What about verifying people? How do you verify that the money raised is going to the people that it's supposed to?
Absolutely. So trust is fundamental to asking for help and to giving. So we have a very expert team. We've been doing this for a decade. We have technology that looks for anomalies. And then all money goes through our third-party payment processors, which do their own verification before any money is released to anybody. And if there is ever a problem, even after all of that, we have the GoFundMe giving guarantee, which makes sure that anyone can get their money back in any case.
Right, so you can claw it back from...
If there's a problem, which is very rare, misuse is very rare, but we put that in place to make sure that people have complete peace of mind when they're giving.
As viewers will have defined from your accent, you're a Brit in Silicon Valley. What's it been like making the adjustment? You were Yahoo for a number of years.
I've been there 27 years, so I'm not sure which one I am. But there are a lot of similarities, but a couple of the differences is the scale. It is just a much bigger market. And I think there still is a difference in sort of the embracing of controlled risk in Silicon Valley is still the speciality. And you do notice that.
Tim, there was loads more I wanted to ask you, but I'm afraid we're out of time. But appreciate you joining me today. Thank you. Well, the oil price rose on events in Israel before giving back some of those gains. It's the current price right now. We're roughly back to where we were last Wednesday afternoon. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $87.77 a barrel. That's up 3.75% on the session. On the foreign exchange markets, well, there's been a lot of safe haven buying of the dollar, as you might expect. The pound is down by 0.25% against the greenback. It's up by roughly the same amount against the euro. The single currency off just over 0.2% right now against the dollar. On the equity markets, well, Europe has closed to the downside. Here's the current picture. All of the main European indices in negative territory. Among the biggest fallers today were the airline stocks. Air France KLM fell by some 7% in Paris. Lufthansa was off 4.25% in Frankfurt. To the upside, defence stocks have been trading high, led by the Italian helicopter maker Leonardo. That's up 4.25%, while the tank manufacturer Rheinmetall is ahead by some 6% in Frankfurt. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 also finished in negative territory. It was in positive territory for most of the day. Look at that. I mean, it's more or less unchanged when you look at it. Similar themes have been at play there. The biggest gainer in percentage terms in the FTSE today was BAE Systems, the shares finishing 4.5% to the good. BP and Shell were likewise cheered by the higher oil price. To the downside, International Airlines Group, the owner of British Airways, and Intercontinental Hotels, they were among the major fallers. The biggest FTSE faller today, though, was Croda at the bottom of the screen there, the specialty chemicals group. That fell by nearly 7.5% on a profits warning. Outside the FTSE, travel and tourism stocks are again all trading to the downside. They include Wizz Air, which finished off 6%, TUI, which finished off by a similar amount, and EasyJet. Meanwhile, the oil and gas producer Energen, which has assets in Israel, fell by some 17%. Other stocks with Israeli exposure also trading to the downside today. They include BATM, Advanced Communications, which is down 8%. An old favourite, that among private punters during the dot-com boom, I seem to remember. Going back a long time there. Over on Wall Street, the main stock indices have opened to the downside, as the Nasdaq off 0.5% lower, the S&P and the Dow all lower as well. Among the big fallers are the airlines. United Airlines, Delta Airlines and American Airlines all off by between 5% and 6%. There have been, however, big gains for defence stocks. Northrop Grumman's up 8% right now. Lockheed Martin's ahead by 5.5%, and General Dynamics is up 7%. I should mention, by the way, the bond markets in the US. We talked a lot about the bond markets last week. They're all closed today for Columbus Day. Well, joining me now is Michael Brown. He's Chief Investment Officer at Martin Currie. Michael, great to see you as ever. What have you made of all this?
I think the markets are overreacting in sectors at this particular point in time. If we go back, and we I'm afraid, do go back long enough to remember a few of these incidences, and this is a very bad one, that actually the market overreacts on day one. So I would imagine that people will settle a little bit as we go forward over the next few days. Risk-free assets obviously bounced. I think some of the energy side is probably overdone at this point in time, but, you know, I could be eating my words tomorrow morning.
I mean, this has been described as the worst attack on Israel for 49 years, since the Yom Kippur War. I mean, on that occasion, it sparked a global crisis in energy. We're not going to get that this time around.
Well, I mean, you know, it's for those of us with a bit of grey hair, this is awfully like the 70s now, isn't it? We've got an oil price shock. We've now got Middle Eastern really big flare-up and big troubles on that. We've got an inflation shock. We've got full employment, that governments are running huge fiscal deficits to keep running at this particular point in time. I mean, it is very 1977 all over again. And you know, I think that's where the interesting thing is just how much will the central bank stick with this particular path to ensure that that doesn't occur? How aggressive are they prepared to be in the face of what I think will become some really significant political pressure in the early part of next year?
Very good point. What about some of these individual stocks? I mean, you think they're oversold from what you've just said?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I've been on a couple of times, Ian, haven't I? I said, look, there's going to be a pattern here. What you're going to see is you'll start to see the inflationary expectations start to fall away. And some of this sort of news can help that because people want to keep the pound in their pocket rather than go out and spend it. So are we going to see a little bit weaker activity on that basis? That's where the airlines are getting hit, as well as obviously other fears. And at that point, as that ripples through, we'll start to see the bond market start to rally. And I think for me at that point, and I've said it a few times, let's buy some big old dividend stocks out there because there are some fantastic bargains at this particular moment in time. I've got to say it. Metro Bank, the bondholders have just settled at 14% interest rates on part of the bonds, but you can get 8 or 9% on NatWest and Legals. Which do you think will survive for longer?
Yes, right? Good point. What about some of the other big dividend payers? I mean, a lot of them are utilities. Is there a political risk attached to some of them now?
There's always a political risk attached to the utilities. Both parties have been prone to go dipping in that particular pond. The interesting one for me, and that sort of side conversation, is this concept of actually building out our infrastructure better. And that there, I think National Grid will have a big role to play as we decarbonise the electricity production and distribute that around the country. Again, 5.75% yield and actually maybe a growth story there as well. I'm interested.
A lot of people it's in the sights of a lot of people, though. They don't think National Grid is investing enough.
Yes, it is. But if you're going to invest more, as we know, you're going to get a rate of return on that. So you're going to be given some degree of a guaranteed rate of return for putting those assets in the ground or overhead. And therein lies the opportunity set.
All right, Michael, always good to get your expertise. Thanks for joining me. That's it from me. I'm back again at 11:30 tomorrow morning with our morning edition. Hope very much to see you then. At least I won't be talking to you about turmoil in the US bond markets, but who knows what else is going to happen between now and then. Well, coming up after this short break, it's Mark Austin for the News Hour, and he is, of course, in Jerusalem with all the very latest on events in Israel and in the Gaza Strip. Do stay tuned for all of that. Thanks for joining me today. See you tomorrow. Cheerio.